Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. This is Tom and Jesse Talk Movies. I am Jesse.
And I'm Tom.
Today, before we get ahead of ourselves here, I would just like to say if you have any questions, concerns, and you'll probably have a lot of concerns after today, contact us at csprograms@cshlibrary.org. I've been waiting for this for a long time. This is going to be our Die Hard program. For those of you who do not know what Die Hard is, welcome to the world. This is one of my favorite movies of all time, starring Bruce Willis, 1988. Yeah. I'm just going to stare at you the whole time while we discuss this. Filmed by John McTiernan, probably one of the most seminal action movies of all time.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of important. I promise Tom is going to get his chance to speak, but I think it's kind of important to contextualize exactly what Die Hard was, because the 1980s was like, that was the action era. Right?
Yeah.
So you had your Schwarzeneggers and you had your Stallones.
Dolph
Lundgren, sure, the Punisher.
Yeah.
But as the decade was kind of coming to a close, so this is 1988, as we said, you had a very different kind of action movie, which was Die Hard. John McClane, Bruce Willis's character, kind of is he's not the archetypal hero, because first of all, just from a physical standpoint, he wasn't built like a Schwarzenegger and he wasn't built like a Stallone.
It's kind of like a regular guy.
Like a regular guy. So when you think of Schwarzenegger, maybe you think of Terminator. When you think of Stallone, maybe you think of Rambo.
And Rocky.
And Rocky, certainly. But Bruce Willis didn't have that physique.
Right.
He was more of kind of like an everyman.
It's all in the mouth.
It's all in the mouth. Yeah. So that's kind of what makes Die Hard so interesting, because it's one of the things where it's Bruce Willis and he's kind of trapped in a skyscraper in Christmas.
Yes.
And his wife and her colleagues are taken hostage by the very, very great
Hans
Gruber, played by
Alan Rickman.
Thank you. Drawing a blank. I shouldn't draw a blank. And it just works because John McClane he's a very flawed character, I guess you could say. And that's what makes he's multi-dimensional, I guess you could say. And he's flawed. Bruce Willis is an NYPD cop. This is Christmas. He doesn't really want to be visiting his wife in California, who just started a new job, but he has to kind of save their marriage.
Yeah.
They have 2 young kids. And what makes the movie work so well is that and this has kind of become the prevailing theme, it's John McClane is in the wrong place at the wrong time. And he
totally
does not want to be doing this, but he knows he has to save the day. I'll get into my thoughts about why I like this movie so much, but I'd like to discuss with you, because I know it's been a little while since you've seen this movie. So tell me what you think with a fresh set of eyes.
Yeah, no, I've seen it a few times. It's been a few years since I've actually sat through the whole thing, and I really do like it. I really think it deserves all the hype and the praise that it gets. It's definitely one of the best action films of the 80s, and I mean, even still today. The film doesn't feel that dated compared to a lot of other stuff you may rewatch from the 80s. Right. I think why this film is so important and such a staple is that it's a smart action film. You could always say like, oh yeah, the 80s, it's stuff like Predator or some of the Terminator is good, but sure. Like things, I guess like Predator or just, Commando.
Yeah, exactly.
There's so many mindless action films. And then even at the stuff today, like Fast and Furious, which every week I just completely put it down a little bit more.
And every week, doesn't a new one come out? That's kind of how it feels.
Yeah. But what's so great about Die Hard is that it's just an overall really well-made film. It's a pretty basic plot. Like you said, it is Bruce Willis plays John McClane. He's, maybe, I don't know, a little burnt out, but, your typical New York cop, right. Tough guy, and he's going through something with his wife who is in Los Angeles, working in this big high-rise, office building, Nakatomi Plaza. Mm-hmm. Awesome location.
Very cool setting.
Yeah, and, he goes out there at Christmas time to join her at the Christmas party. Maybe they're going to reconcile, but it's clear that they have marital issues. So already you're like, okay, cool. Now it's like, I know they have to introduce the characters and all that, but you're like, okay, this is going to be pretty surface level. But it's actually handled really well. And it's a really good introduction to who the characters are. So that way, like when the action starts, you're completely on board. You're like, oh, I actually care about these characters that we're watching. You know, this is a movie where I think the characters are almost more interesting than the actual action going on. And when I say it's a smart action film, it's smart because the characters are well written. One of the best bad guys, like played by Alan Rickman, like ever in an action film, because he's smart and he's different. You know, anybody can just be your typical like rich billionaire working from like a off a computer control room, but like Hans Gruber is a fascinating character because while he's an evil genius, but in the way that he comes across as he could be nice, maybe you might want to hang out with him to an extent. And, you know, he doesn't just come in and start murdering people left and right. Like, while that happens, there's a purpose, and he just has such a presence on screen. And I think it's really a great setup, you know, how we get to see how different Bruce Willis's character is from the LA lifestyle. Like, you're taking somebody from New York who's very stereotypical and putting them in LA, and he's totally a fish out of water there. And I really like that. And when he does get to, you know, the Christmas party at the Plaza, it seems very like, you know, oh, wow, this is a very ritzy kind of place. The people who are running this clearly are well off, and he so doesn't fit in.
That introductory scene, I don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
But when he does enter the Christmas party for the first time, you talk about that's a very good.
I love how he's just like looking around.
Right.
Yeah.
And he takes like a sip of champagne or some sort of a mixed drink, and he like pulls it right away. But that just emphasizes the fact that he is just totally out of his element.
And I like that they give his wife an actual character. She's not just this damsel in distress. She's very clever. She's smart. She's professional. And I think that's awesome. So like when these two characters do meet, they start to talk about their marriage. And, you know, it plays very serious. It's not just surface level, like, oh, we need to introduce these characters as quickly as possible, and then we can start the action. Like, I actually care about what's going on. And there are a few other characters. You know, there's one of her coworkers is kind of this cocky guy who's full of himself, clearly has an interest in the wife. His name is Ellis, and he
drug addict, actually.
Yeah, of course.
Which makes that dynamic funny, because you have a scene where he's kind of doing a line of cocaine, and then you have your NYPD cop that walks right into the room, and he kind of gives a line like, oh, you missed the spot.
Yeah. And I think what's so great about John Mcclane is that he's such a flawed character, and he's unlikable, but you like that he's unlikable because he's purely entertaining, but he's also smart. Like, he's a total wisecracking, hotshot, you know, man of one lines, always has something witty to say. And you're like, okay, he's clearly like, you're stuck at 21 years old. I could see why his wife is like, yeah, I want nothing to do with you. And she's off trying to really rise up in the company. So you totally get that. You know exactly who this guy is. You know exactly what's happening in their marriage and so forth. And but that makes for a really good character. I think John Mcclane is one of the most interesting action heroes, because Bruce Willis can actually act. You know, and a lot of stuff nowadays you're like,
you might not know.
But like, no, he's really good in this film. And I feel that if you didn't have John Mcclane with his one-liners and his, you know, sassiness, it would just be another generic action film. But that's why this one really stands above the rest, and I think still holds up to this day. And really just being one of the best action films, period, because you have really good actors playing interesting, original characters, like relatable characters. You know, like, I love the James Bond films, but is he the most relatable? Like, maybe not, but John Mcclane is. And I think that's, so, you know, when you have a good setup, you know, half the movie's done. Like, all right, great. I'm already on board with this. Let's go. And then it just keeps getting better. I mean, just the way you have John Mcclane, he's on the outside while these terrorists have taken over the party. They're calling the shots, and John is just running around trying to stop them. And I just love like little touches, like he doesn't have a pair of shoes. You know, there's a lot of running jokes in this movie. So like little things like that make this stand out from the rest.
Right. I'm glad that you feel the same way about this.
I do. I was honestly really impressed with how much, like I said, I'd seen it maybe in full, maybe 2 or 3 times when I was much younger. I hadn't seen it in maybe 5 or plus years. So watching it this time, I'm like, okay, it's going to be another dumb action film. But like, honestly, it just feels really smart and clever, and it's hysterical.
Right.
And I'm always picky when they mix humor and action. You know, I think like I can't stand movies like Hitman's Bodyguard where it's just slapstick and goofy.
I'm not into this stuff.
This is witty, clever humor, and that's why it works. I mean, like a lot of the one-liners John just puts out there as the movie's going on are legitimately funny, and it feels genuine coming from his character. Right. So the audience is on board.
Where it's almost like it's some of the lines that he uses, they're out of exasperation. It's just the way that he's dealing with.
It just comes so natural, and some of them were actually ad-libbed, which I think was great.
Right, that's terrific. And
you know,
obviously, the formative line from the movie, which we really can't say the whole thing of, but the yippee-ki-yay, of course. I mean, the back and forth that he has with Hans Gruber on the radio, you know, because Hans knows that this guy's somewhere in the building.
Yeah.
And he knows that he's starting to pick off his men one by one. There's what, about 13 or so, 12 men in the beginning, and one by one they start getting picked off by Mcclane. And just the back and forth between Bruce Willis and Alan Rickman is one of the things that really stands out. But there's just there's so many touches about this movie that just makes it work. And I try to objectively remove myself from the situation because I happen to love Bruce Willis. I recognize his later career. He's made some interesting choices, but you see something like this and you see how great he was in this role and you're like, okay, I get why he gets a pass and he could be John Mcclane in everything forever because he's that good.
I would say like 95% of his roles he's John McClane, but then you see stuff like The Sixth Sense,
Moonrise Kingdom,
where it's like, wow, he's actually
Unbreakable.
He's a really great serious actor when the material calls for him, when he most importantly wants to be. But I think you know, having Bruce be John McClane is literally perfect. The film almost writes itself in that sense, and I really like Bonnie Bedelia as the Holly, the wife, and you know, to see a film in the '80s give an actress such a good part, because this is a movie where it could be all throwaway, like, oh, you know, he's just got to save her and that's it. But it's like, I like her. She is a really interesting character. And what she brings to the table is that, like, oh, I totally believe and sympathize with their marital issues. Right. And then you throw in this kind of little thing and it's just pure entertainment.
She's not a contrivance. She's necessary.
Yeah.
You know,
she's not just a script element.
Right.
You know?
It's not like, oh, Bonnie Bedelia is kidnapped. So, I mean, yes, she does happen to be one of the elements of why Bruce is so invested in trying to save her. But she is an interesting character in her own right. And she is kind of a strong-willed woman. Mm-hmm. After the kind of head of the company is executed, she becomes the de facto ruler. You know, the leader of the group of hostages. And she's kind of a go-getter, and she's got a personality, and she's very well-written character. There are just so many. It's one of the things, just from a plot standpoint, some of the things that I really like, the exposition about John and his marriage being on the rocks.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily, it's not told to you directly. I mean, you see signs. One of my favorite revelations in the movie is how John really knows things are on the rocks. He gets in and he has to figure out what floor, because he's not sure what floor his wife and the party is on. And they have this directory, and he's got to find
his wife's name. It's all touch screen, very advanced for the time.
So he goes under M for Mcclane, and he sees that, wait, there's no Holly Mcclane listed. So then he goes back and, he sees Gennaro, meaning she's not even using his last name anymore.
Yeah.
A subtle touch like that, it's like you don't need to have a fight between the two of them, because you already know tensions are high going into it.
Exactly.
It's a really well-written script. The stakes always feel high, and then they just continue to get higher and higher. You know, like you said, you mentioned a great point. Bruce Willis not having shoes.
Yeah.
And then the first enemy that he kills, the guy's feet, you know, they're not the same size as his. So he's like, you got to be kidding me.
Yeah. With the small. Yeah. And it's just like little touches like that make it worthwhile. It's a cut above the rest. It stands out. And you know, when you have good actors playing good characters, they bring the character to life. You can relate to them, see them as, oh, it's not just a movie. I feel like I said earlier, more than half of the movie is just done at that point, because it's like that's just so great. You could almost say plot could take a back seat, because I'm just on board. I just want to hang out with these people and see what they do. And then I think when the time comes when the terrorists show up, you know, you have Alan Rickman, excellent actor, playing this really interesting bad guy, and you know, he's smart. He's after these bonds, and what was it, like 64 or some 600 something million.
It's an outrageous amount.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, that's what's going on. But what I really like is when they make a like a location, like setting plays a character, and I feel like this film so works in the high-rise plaza during a Christmas party,
which turned out to be the Fox headquarters. Is where they
which was very cool. And it's like, okay, you know, I'm totally on board. And it becomes kind of this cat and mouse game between John McClane and the terrorists. And, you know, McClane does a lot of like smart things, you know, like when he gets kills one of the bad guys, he's able to obtain a machine gun so he could, you know, go after them.
Because he starts off against 13, 12 other guys with just a handgun. That's it. That's
exactly. But he's smart. And this is what I like about the movie, is that when he gets the machine gun, there's a scene where the elevator opens up and it's the dead body of one of the, you know, the bad guys, the henchman, and it says, "Now I have a machine gun." See, like, I love that, because that plays into who John McClane is. So like, you have this character is becoming. It's not just him doing one-liners. It's
consistent throughout.
Exactly.
You see that John McClane in the highest point of tension to just the exposition of him on an airplane talking next.
His personality is now like intertwining with the plot, and I really think that's cool. And that's what makes this so much more interesting. It's just a really thoughtful film. It has a lot of layers to it, and you can tell a lot went into it, and I think that's great. And then the introduction of the other character, the cop, who again, just like, wow, why do I like these characters so much? Why are
played
they
by Reginald Bell Johnson?
And he's great from Family Matters, right? And he's great.
Terrific.
And we just cut to this. Like, first of all, I love when John McClane is trying to call out to get help, and they don't. The operators, they don't take him seriously.
Another line we can't really repeat.
Hysterical. And then they're like, we'll just give it to some, you know, cop, which they refer to as black and white. It's like, oh, just some patrol guy, whatever. And we cut to this guy, and you look at him, and he's getting all these Twinkies at this gas station. You're like, they picked he looks like the most incompetent goofball cop. But that's why this works.
And yet, interestingly enough, there's a backstory to him, which you end up finding, and he has his own.
I love that.
He has his own arc, you know?
Right. We could have easily just said, we call in the SWAT, and then there's this standoff, and it would have been like, okay. But when you have an action movie, that's one thing, and then you add awesome characters with real-life personalities. I mean, that's just
a plus. And I think that if you were to just pitch this and say, yeah, you know, there's going to be a lot of back and forth on a walkie-talkie between another cop and the main villain, and it's Bruce, and, you know, sometimes he's just kind of staying in one location. You'd be like, well, that doesn't sound very interesting.
Exactly.
But it's the way that the dialogue is written that there's always tension there. There's always tension. So even in moments where there aren't explosions and there aren't people being shot, it just works because, like you said, the characters themselves are so interesting. There's like really a level of multi-dimensionality. Is that a word? Well, the characters are multi-dimensional. That's what we'll say. Even Alan Rickman, he says, no, don't call me a terrorist. I'm not a terrorist. You know, like there is sort of a decorum to his character where he does, you know, Holly at one point, she's the de facto leader, like we said, of the hostages. She says, I have a woman here who's going to give birth, and, you know, she's talking to Hans. I have a woman here. Can we put her in another room where she can kind of recline? And he goes, no, I can't do that for you, but how about I bring one out to her? Yeah. So it's like, again, he's not all bad.
Yeah.
He's not. There's a side to him where he kind of does. There's depth to the character. And that's what I love. It's not these cheesy throwaways 1980 actions film where, you know, first of all, this is where you see, like, name another 1980s action film, like with Schwarzenegger or Stallone, where they're just such a commanding presence. They can't act. They can kick butt.
Right.
But Bruce Willis in this role, he can act.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the great action that we get. It's about these witty one-liners. It's about his charisma. It's about his delivery.
Yeah, he's very charismatic.
What's so funny too is that this movie in so many ways should have never happened. Bruce Willis was like a fifth, sixth choice for this role. Initially, they pitched the role to like Frank Sinatra.
Okay.
I mean, this movie was never supposed to happen.
Right.
And then finally, when they landed on Bruce Willis, they gave him some sort of a crazy, it was like $5 million to make this movie at the time, which was a huge risk.
Yeah.
And look, the movie is like folklore. I mean, it's so ingrained in what American culture is now. Because the movie, I think, holds up relatively so well.
It does, yeah.
Now, the only other thing I'll say about this, because I think you made some great points. You and I, we kind of align ourselves in the way we don't really like overly long movies. Like,
right.
We have this recurring joke between the two of us. If it's over 2 hours, man, the movie's got to be really good because it's like,
I agree.
This movie, okay, it's not over 2 hours by a long shot, but what, 2 hours, 12 minutes, 13 minutes, somewhere around there?
Yeah.
This movie flies by.
Yeah, it's never like slow. It's never boring. Each scene is pretty essential.
Right.
You know?
Right. There are so many times where you and I will watch a movie and we'll go, yeah, it was good, but you could have trimmed the fat there. You could have cut.
Yeah, exactly.
It just works. It just works because the characters are so good. Argyle, the limo driver, which we didn't add.
Yes.
I mean, there are just so many sort of eccentric characters that they add their own dimension to.
It just does everything right. It has a lot going for it. This is like what an action movie really should be. And
right.
I mean, the action genre is so easy to, go after because, action movies, it's always, it's action movie logic, and like I get that. And, we love action movies and they're fun. It's eye candy, but this is like a legit story to the point where it almost becomes a thriller. And you're like, yeah, this is pretty intense.
Right.
And, this is some good stuff.
The biggest compliment I can get, by the way, about this movie, and that I hear from a lot of people, you talk to people who are not necessarily devout action genre fans, and they'll go, I saw Die Hard and I loved it.
Exactly.
And sometimes you're just surprised, but you know what? It does. It has an appeal that sort of extends just beyond, not everyone is going to want to go in and watch Terminator. Mm-hmm. It's just not their thing,
Right.
Not everyone is going to want to go in and see Rambo. Rocky sort of had that appeal,
Yeah, it did.
Where it had a broader appeal. Die Hard is one of these movies that a lot of people you'll talk to will say, "Oh, I love that movie. I remember Die Hard." And now we didn't even talk about the whole "is it a Christmas movie" argument, because that's obviously
every year I always hear is a Christmas. I count it as a Christmas movie. I mean, to me, a Christmas movie, the plot doesn't necessarily have to do with Christmas, but like it takes place around Christmas. That's fine.
And what's going to be interesting now is, of course, this is the precursor to the next movie that we'll be talking about, which is Die Hard 2.
Right.
Now, Die Hard 2, I happen to feel, is even a more authentic Christmas movie than the first one. It's going to be interesting to see what your opinion is.
Yeah, this is the one that it's like I'm probably the least familiar with. Okay. So I remember I saw it in full maybe once a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And I remember it being really boring and being like, it has some elements from the first film, but it still didn't grab me 100%. Right. I am really interested in revisiting that. I'm actually hoping I like it, but I just find it funny that they did 5 Die Hard movies at this point.
And then unfortunately, they so changed the formula once you got to the 5th one. One of the things that really, again, what we discussed makes this movie so great is the fact that John McClane is like this unwilling participant in the events that are around him.
Yeah, and that's why it's
down to the franchise. And then that's really one of the things that this movie did so well, is compared to the other action genre films. Mm-hmm. This just feels so original.
It does.
It just feels so original.
Yeah,
it works.
Because how many movies have there been? Okay, we have terrorists come in, they want to steal something, everyone's held hostage. You're like, okay,
you bring in the one guy or one girl that's able to stop. I mean, it's been done a million times over.
Exactly. That's why this still holds up today. And it's like, how many movies have been? God, I remember it was a couple years ago. There was this movie that came out called Lockout with
Guy Pearce.
Guy Pearce, and it's essentially Die Hard in space, and he is written in a way where he's trying to be John McClane, and you're like, nah. You made
a good point, kind of off air, that we were talking about, that I wanted to bring up quickly, in that sometimes when you see a movie, this is a movie that came out in 1988, so this has had so many imitators. This movie. And sometimes in the moment when you see a movie, one of the imitators, you forget about what the effect was what the original was. And but you could see like, oh my gosh, there's so many cues from different so more modern action movies. People are still ripping off Die Hard, and people will continue to still rip off.
Yes, they will. Yeah, what I said was, and this has happened a few times where it's like, an original film, say like The Exorcist, like that came out in the 70s, and it was a major film about exorcism, and then it would be like, oh, nowadays I watch all the current ones that are about exorcisms, and they're ones I like and don't like, and then you go back and see the original, and it's like you feel like you watched it already because you've seen all the ripoffs. Mm-hmm. So that's why with Die Hard, I was nervous. I was like, oh, I hope it doesn't just feel like, I can see it being good for its time, but there are other movies that have either outdone it or feel so similar, so therefore it wouldn't be as special. I didn't feel that way. I felt like, no, this really does stand above all the other movies that have tried to rip it off and act similar.
It's terrific. So, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
I mean, like, I just applaud that we have an action film with legit characters, and that's so refreshing to see. It still feels refreshing 30-something years later.
Right.
And I hope they don't ever remake it or whatever. If they do, it
Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm talking about. It's like, I don't like those goofy slapstick kind of action comedies because those to me are just stupid. But Die Hard is such a clever, it's a well-written movie too, aside from, the hilarious bits and the action. And
there is some really terrific action too.
Yes, there is. And just like little cool, like, filmmaking techniques where it's like when a certain character, is falling, we just have a nice slow-mo shot with some awesome music in the background. It's like, see, this is great.
The close-up.
I'm like, see, this is what action movies. Right. This is what they are.
It's shot well. There's a certain grittiness to it. It's not a romanticized film. It doesn't have this lush color palette. But you know what? It's taking place in an office building. You're gonna get, grays and blacks and gritty, and that's what works. This movie works on so many levels. I haven't seen Die Hard 2 in a while. Maybe it's been 2 years. The other standout for me, and it's reminiscent in so many ways of the first one, is Die Hard 3, Die Hard with a Vengeance, which was directed by John McTiernan again. Mm-hmm. He didn't return for the second film. But when I think of camaraderie, when I think of a really good bond, Samuel L. Jackson, of course, is one of the other leads in Die Hard 3. And when I think of strong characters, that sort of rivals some of the characters in the first Die Hard. I wish that we had maybe a little bit of time to talk about Die Hard with a Vengeance, but I mean, characters are such a strength of Die Hard, and it's just, and I think that's why it sort of transcends the action genre.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't necessarily have to love explosions and people getting shot to just like these characters.
Of course. And it doesn't feel goofy, at least the first one doesn't.
Not at all. So. It holds up remarkably well. So I'm really glad you liked it.
Yeah.
I am excited next time again to revisit Die Hard 2.
I am as well.
It was a movie that came out, so Die Hard was 88, Die Hard 2 was 1990. Directed by Rennie Harlan. I'm sure he's a nice man.
Okay.
So it's going to be interesting to revisit that. It's probably a movie that many people would think had no right to be good, and critically, it was actually pretty well received.
Yeah,
it made a ton of money. And
gotta watch Die Hard every Christmas.
It's going to be. This is a new tradition for me. I watched it around Christmas last year. Did it this year. I'm going to do it again next year.
Sounds good to me.
So thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions, please contact us at csprograms@cshlibrary.org. Thank you for tuning in, and I look forward to talking about Die Hard 2 the next time.
Looking forward to it.